Well, hello, Hebrew class. I am going to introduce you today to the BDB, which is the Brown Driver Briggs Dictionary. There are hard copies of this dictionary, this Hebrew lexicon, a fancy word for a dictionary. You can find these used on Amazon or in other used bookstores online. You can also use the free PDF. Unfortunately, it's a lot to print out, and I wouldn't recommend that. So you'd have to use a digital form of it. But nonetheless, you can find this for free. It's been around for quite a long time, and I'll introduce you to how this dictionary works. It works a little bit differently than a dictionary that you might be used to if you're using English or a Romance language like French or Spanish. If you come from a background that has somewhat different kinds of dictionaries, then this might be somewhat familiar to you to look things up by root. But if your primary use of a dictionary has been in English, then this is going to be a bit of a surprise to you. But ultimately, I think it is a helpful thing. So, what are some of the advantages of this BDB, this dictionary? Why do we use this on our in our course, and why am I going to recommend you to use it on quizzes? Well, because it is a one-volume reference work. There's some other Hebrew dictionaries out there that are multi-volume. They actually are great dictionaries, but they're huge, and you can't carry them around with you. The BDB is pretty big, but nonetheless, it's possible to carry it around, and it's one volume. It is the only standard Hebrew English lexicon or dictionary under $100 US dollars. This is there are some other dictionaries that you can find that are under $100 for ancient Hebrew and modern English that go between those two languages. But the problem is they are oftentimes not complete. They are not standardized. They will give you a little bit of information, but not a whole lot. As you'll see, the BDB gives you tons of information. That is, it is detailed. It has a complete listing much of the time, not always, but it often has a complete listing of all of the text in the Bible that a particular word is used in, Hebrew word, right? So in other words, you can use this as a concordance. It is both a lexicon and a concordance. You might not be familiar with that word, concordance, but a concordance is a book that lists all of the times that a word occurs in the Bible. Now, the problem with this is that if you're using an English concordance, like the word love, in English might show up a whole bunch of times in a translation like the NRSV or the King James Version, the KJV. But those might not be connected exactly to the Hebrew words that stand behind the English translation love. There are a couple of different words you can use in Hebrew to mean that. If you are doing a word study for a Bible study, for a sermon and so on, it really is a lot better to actually use the very particular Hebrew word that you want to look up. So if you're looking up the kind of love that is talked about in Deuteronomy chapter 6, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That actually would be a really good word study to find out what that word means, what it actually means. You don't want to mix it up with other words that might mean love in a different way. So you want that real Hebrew word. So you're going to look it up in the BDB, and the BDB will show you every single time that word shows up in the Bible. It's pretty amazing. Also, it has all these exegetical insights. I'll show you a couple of those today, but it's really a cool dictionary in terms of connecting some things in the text with other parts of the Bible, but also with just giving you lots of great background information. And it's organized according to roots. That means that when you look up a word in the BDB, you don't look it up by how it's spelled necessarily. That means you look it up by the 3-letter root. Remember, you can add beginnings and endings of words, prefixes and suffixes, or if you're talking about a verb, the preformatives and subformatives, you can add some beginnings and endings. Well, with the BDB, you just want to look it up by the root, and then you can find all the different possible forms that stuff you can add to the front and to the end, and patterns and things you can add to the middle. You'll find all the different possible forms of that root, of the words that you're looking up. But since it's organized by the root, and you look it up by the root, you get to see that root definition of the word that you're dealing with in all of the related forms. So it can be really helpful for exegesis, that is, for trying to interpret a biblical text. Because if you want to know what a word means, looking up what related words mean really is helpful. and these words that are related by being part of the same root. This kind of matters. Okay, so to be very honest, there are some clear disadvantages to the BDB, including it was published in 1906, which is a long time ago. Lots of stuff has been uncovered since then, has been discovered since then, so there are a few embarrassing things in here. I'll show you one of them. Often they have these kind of hypothetical roots that they list things under. So every once in a while, you'll have to kind of guess where they thought something should be in the dictionary. They will often tell you and show you where something is. They know what you're going to look up, and they often will point you to the right direction. So I'll point that out to you as well. It is not the most user-friendly dictionary in the world. They use lots of abbreviations and some Latin and things, so it can be tricky. There is a little code, or it decodes some of the abbreviations in the front matter and the introduction to the book. So there is some stuff it's interesting. But so the fact that it's organized according to roots actually can be a huge positive. It can be a negative as well, because when you organize things according to roots, then if you don't know the root, or if the root is tricky, if it's hard to find out, if it's a weak root, then sometimes it's hard to find what you're looking for. Also, those Latin abbreviations I mentioned, yeah, those aren't so user-friendly. It is kind of nice that they can be used, lots of different people around the world can understand these things, but unless you know Latin, right, then it's tricky. And also cognates. Cognates are words that show up in two different languages that are pretty much the same word. So if you're thinking about like in English, we say information, and in French we say information. Information and information are cognates. It's the same basic word in two different languages. So those cognates, they'll represent the cognates in the BDB, which is great because you'll be able to see like, okay, well, if a word means this in Hebrew and it means that in Aramaic and that in Syriac, and those are all related languages, that's cool information. Unless they write the Syriac in the Syriac script, which you have to learn Syriac to read, or Ethiopic, which is another language that's super cool. But they write it in Ethiopic, which you have to decode out of Ethiopic then. And so it's not as helpful. So there are some disadvantages to the BDB. I get it. I know. But just wait to see what all this amazing stuff that you can see in here is. Okay, so we're going to use like a couple of test cases here. One test case is Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. So this right here is Isaiah chapter 6. We can start with verse 1 up there at the top here. So you can see here's chapter 6, verse 1. So, Bishnat Mot HaMelech Uziyahu. So, Bishnat, so it's in, that's ba in. And then Shanat comes from Shana, meaning year. Shana has a hey at the end. If you put it in construct, it turns into a tav. So, in year of death of Hamelech, of the king, Utziyahu, Uzziah. So in the year of the death of the king Uzziah, this is all one long construct chain. So in the year of the death of King Uzziah, in the year that King Uzziah died is how this is often translated in English. I was looking or watching from the verb ra'ah, to see. Here's our aleph, which we'll get to later. You haven't learned that yet, but and I was watching et Adoni, right? So you know what et means, and then Adoni, my Lord. Yoshev, which is a form we haven't learned yet, but this comes from yashav, which means to sit or seated. Al kiseh, upon the throne. Ram, lifted up, exalted. V'nisa, and lifted up, so high and lifted up. V'shulav, maleim et ha-hechal, and the hem of his garment was filling the temple. Hechal means temple. It also means palace. So God's palace and God's temple. And then we get to verse 2. So check this out. This word that's in red. It's a noun. This noun that's in red, we'll be looking at, and then these red words down here we'll be looking at. But first, we're going to start here with seraphim, the seraphim, right? The angels, those angel things. Here's our im ending because it's plural. So seraph is our root, sin, resh, pei, and then we have our noun ending there, the seraphim. Omedim, which comes from the root amab, which means to stand. They were standing. mima'alo. So anyway, I'll stop there for a second. But these seraphim here, and they were flying around. Here's Oph right here, yeah. And then they were calling out this one to that, Ze el Ze. So remember kara, to call out or cry out. So, and they were calling out Ze el Ze va'amar, and it said. So one of these said, Kadosh, 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 Yahweh Tzavaot, Malo kol haaretz kovodo. So holy, holy, holy Yahweh Tzavaot, which means of hosts. A tzava means an army. Tzavaot means like the armies, the hosts, the armies. So Yahweh of the armies. It is filled, malo means to fill, all the earth, the glory of him. All the earth is filled with God's glory. Kavod meaning glory, or kind of weight, heaviness, importance. So in any event, there's that scene, right? So under what entries in the English dictionary would we find the word singing? Just for a minute here. We're really going to be looking for these words here, saraf and kadosh, but just for a minute, just think in English, where would you look in the dictionary for singing? You wouldn't see singing actually in the dictionary. You'd look up under sing, right? Or sages, you'd have to look it up under sage, right? Or mice. There's no entry for mice. You'd have to look up mouse. Or goose. Well, you'd actually look up geese under goose, I think. Yeah, that's kind of mixed up. But anyway, under what entries in the Hebrew dictionary would we find each of the following? Well, malachim. You wouldn't actually look up malachim, right? That im ending. This is melech plus im, the im noun ending, right? So you take off the noun ending and you get melech. You'd look it up under melech. That's the root. So you'd look it up under the root. So you'd start with mem, right? Remember our alphabet? Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin. Yeah, you'd look it up under mem. And then you'd look it up under lamed, right? So you'd start with like mem aleph and then mem beit, right? So you can kind of familiarize yourself with the dictionary. One thing I love to do, by the way, is to take little bits of tape and tape the first page of each letter in the dictionary, in the BDB. So like where at the alephs start, I'll put a little piece of tape. Where the beits start, I'll put a little piece of tape a little further down the page. And then where the gimels start, I'll put a little piece of tape so that I can easily move between the aleph section, the beit section, the gimel section, the dalet section, and so on. I'll just do that for the whole alphabet. Now notice at the end of the BDB, there's an Aramaic dictionary. That's because it's a little one. It's because there's a few chapters of Aramaic in the Old Testament. Mostly in the book of Daniel, some in Ezekiel, and there's a little tiny bit in Ezekiel, but some in Ezra and Nehemiah. But don't worry about that. They call it the Chaldee dictionary, I think, which is the Aramaic dictionary. But don't worry about that. So you'll just go through all the way to Tav, the end of the Hebrew alphabet, and you can move easily between all of those different letters and find them. So in any event, you look up Melech under Mem, and then Lamed, and then Kaf. So raglayim, this is a dual ending here, ayim, the two ending, and regel means foot, right? You look this up under regel. That's the root, right? You go to the resh, part of the dictionary. Or aratzot, this is really eretz. So that'd be like lands, plural. You look up under eretz. You go to the aleph part, and then aleph resh, and then aleph resh tzadeh. And then emot, meaning cubit. You look that up under amam. That's a tricky one, right? This is a geminate root, a double root, where the second and third letters of the root are the same. How would you ever know this? Well, so you got this ot ending. You can take off the ot ending because it's plural, and then you've only got two letters left, right? Emot can mean cubit. It can also mean mother, actually, by the way. So this could be either cubit or mother here. But anyway, so you look it up under aleph mem, and then you have this little... You only have two letters, right? If you take off the ot ending, you only have two letters left. You have your aleph and you have your mem. And you got a dagish in your mem, which usually tells you got a doubled letter, right? So think of it as being two of them. Now, if you only have two letters left, you might add a geminate. Just make that second letter and that third repeat and see if it's there in the dictionary. If that's not right, then you might be missing a middle letter, right? Like a middle weak, like a middle vav or a middle yod. So it's a bit tricky sometimes. We haven't learned a lot of those weak roots yet. We'll learn those the last couple weeks of class. But just to say, every once in a while, if you're looking something up, you might have to kind of hunt around a little bit. This is the problem with organizing things by roots and not by how they're spelled. So, for example, Rashim, so this kind of like Rosh or Barashit comes from the same root. And here we see, we would look it up under Resh, Aleph, Shin, meaning head. Or this one, which is that first red word in Isaiah that we looked up in Isaiah chapter 6, and that was Seraphim. Seraphim. We would look it up under Saraf. Seen, and seen and sheen are actually treated differently here, but this, yes, in the dictionary, that's seen first and then sheen. So it would be under seen, resh, pei. So this is how you find the root of a Hebrew noun. You can take off those beginnings and endings that you can see. You can take off the definite article. You can take off the conjunction at the front. You can take off those prepositions like bait, lamed, kaf that get stuck on the front. You can take off the endings, including object suffixes, and you can take off the noun endings, right? So first things first, we eliminate all those obvious endings, those eem endings. Remember that one chapter that said there's some like gentilics, chapter 9, which there's a couple of different like patterns where you can take off some endings like eat. So ivrit means Hebrew. The root there is avar, which means to cross over something. So the Hebrews are the ones that crossed over. And then eliminate those obvious prefixes. Remember, you can add a mem to the front. Sometimes you can add a tav to the front. Every once in a while, you can add an aleph to the front to make a word. So if you've got 4 good letters, like strong letters, and you're pretty sure that you don't have an obvious ending, try taking something off the front and then looking up those last 3 letters and see if it works. So these are just some of the strategies for trying to find your roots. Remember, you need 3 letters in your root. So if you only have 2, or if you have 4, try eliminating some things or adding some things and looking them up in the dictionary and seeing if you can find them. And remember those matres, matres lectionis, or the helper vowels? Remember that you can take out those helper vowels. So like kadosh or tzaddik. Kadosh, it's the root there is kof, dalet, shin. You can take out the holam vav because it's just kind of taking up some space there. It's showing you that it's a holam vav. It's a long O, but it's not actually part of the root. Or tzaddik is another one where you'll have this yod in there a lot of the time, but actually the 3 letters of the root are tzadeh, dalet, and kof. And that means righteous or righteous one. So if you end up with something that you think has a vav as the first letter, these are just some very strange things about the BDB. Look it up under first yod. Sorry, for some reason the BDB folks believed that no word could start with a vav in Hebrew, so the vav section is very, very short in the BDB. Every once in a while you have to kind of guess what they are thinking when they categorize these words. So they don't. I mean, vav is like the conjunction vav, meaning and, is like the only thing in the vav part of the dictionary. It's not the only thing. There's also the word vav, which means nail, or hook. So if you're stuck with a root that you think has a vav at the front of it, look it up under a yod, first yod. Another one is if you end up with a third yod, like gimel, vav yod or something like that, or a third vav, look those up under third hey. Again, I'm sorry, it's strange. BDB doesn't like third vav or third yod roots. They don't think they're real. They don't think they really existed in Hebrew. They think they're covering up some sort of third hey that ended up going away or something. These are just some strange tips and tricks that will save you every now and again with the BDB. If this is confusing to you or you don't understand this part, don't worry. You haven't learned a lot of these strange verbs yet, or strange words that you'd have to change these letters for. These are weak words. We'll get to those the last 2 weeks of class. But if you start kind of wanting to go into texts that we haven't started to translate yet, or that you want to just open up and start reading your favorite stuff in the Bible, which I encourage you to do, you're going to run into some of these weak verbs, and these are the things that you might have to do to find what those words are. So just to look back at Isaiah, remember our 2 words in red that we're going to look for, seraphim and kadosh. We're going to take a look at those. So the root saraf, I give you the page number here, but if we were in class, what I'd say is let's look up saraf, and then I would wait for you to try to find it. So don't look at that page number right now, or if you've already looked at it, try to forget. Try to actually find it. So it's going to be near the end of the alphabet. Remember sin, shin, tav? It's like near the end of the alphabet, so it's going to be near the end of the alphabet. If you're near the end of the BDB, and you start like jumping into Aleph and Beit, like the alphabet starts over again near the very, very end, then you've gotten to that little Aramaic section at the very end of the dictionary. Seen will, if you look up seen and you find seen, great, or any word that starts with seen, then start looking around. Remember, resh is kind of near the end of the alphabet, and then pei is kind of in the middle of the alphabet. So we go by first letter, and then you look up the second letter, and then you look up the third, in a row within the seen section of the dictionary. So it'll be on page 976 and 977. And there's 2 columns for each page, so we often say column 1, column 2. But so you can see the verb saraf on page 976 in column 2. Now, I'll give you a minute just to look at it. If you haven't located it yet, pause this video and then come back once you've found it. And then you'll see that there are 3 entries for saraf. You'll see there's saraf with a Roman numeral 1. And then it'll say NM, and then Saraf 2, NM, and then Saraf 3, NPRM. These are abbreviations. But what this means is that there are 3 different words. They're kind of all, they can be closely related, or sometimes they're actually not related, but they all have the same root. Now, sometimes, like I said, these are kind of variations on the same meaning of the same root, but quite often when they have 1, 2, 3, saraf 1, saraf 2, saraf 3, what they're trying to say is that these are not actually related. So you kind of have to do a little bit of work to be like, are these actually related words or not? They might be homonyms, words that just sound alike, but are actually very different. So like in English, I can say, let's see, when before spelling was standardized, in English, you might say, I'd like to meet you, and you might spell it M-E-E-T, and you also might say, I want to eat some meat. You might spell it, Shakespeare might have spelled it M-E-E-T, and they sounded alike, right? And so how would you tell these 2 words apart? Well, by context, right? So if I were to say, I want to meet you, I'm probably not talking about, eating a steak or something. So in any event, there are words that sound alike, right? And these are separated out here into different roots. Every once in a while, you can say, "Gosh, these sound they sound like they actually mean the same thing." But these are just ancient scholars of ancient Hebrew who are making these determinations, so they might be wrong sometimes. But in any event, you can look these up, and you can see also. Oh, and by the way, NM this is a noun, and then NPRM would be a proper noun, like the name of something or someone. So NF, a feminine noun. So Sorefa is another entry there. Or Masrefa, do you find that? Can you see that on the page there in the BDB? Now you can see that the root there, saraf, has been added to. It's got a feminine ending, and it's got this meme on the front of it, right? That you can add a meme to make nouns in different ways. Chapter 9 of the grammar tells you about that. So Masrefa, that's another word that's built off this same root. We can also see Misrafot Mayim, noun, and then PRLOC. LOC is a location. So this is a proper noun of a place, a particular location. So here's a little image of what you should be kind of looking at with Saraf 2. You see it's Saraf 2. So the 2 here, it's in kind of brackets right here because it doesn't ever occur quite like that. It always occurs in the plural. You can see over here, PL. It always appears in the plural. And you can see there's a little like dagger here. That dagger means that every single time that this shows up in the Bible, this word, seraphim, every time it shows up in the Bible with this particular meaning, it's in this dictionary entry. So every single occurrence of this word can be found here in this dictionary. If you don't see the dagger, then there are some times it shows up in the Bible that they aren't going to tell you about right here. Now, how are they going to tell you about it? Well, look at the very end of this down here. You see IS and then 626. That's Isaiah chapter 6, verses 2 and 6. That's where this word occurs. Does that make sense? Y'all see that? So then you can see it starts off here, 2, this is the second possible meaning of this root. Saraf, which is the hypothetical here, because we never find it quite like that. It's a masculine noun. It's found in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2 is just one occurrence. And plural, seraphim. And then it'll say seraphim. Like, what does it mean? Well, it means seraphim. Boy, what does that mean? We'll ask that question in a minute. And then it has some cool information after here, probably akin or alike to the first root of seraph. So if you then go look at the first root of seraph, you might see some cool stuff there. So as beings originally mythically conceived with serpents' bodies, serpent deities, CF means compare, or go check out Isaiah chapter 14, verse 29 and 30, verse 6. And then CHE com, this is a guy named Cheney who had a commentary. You can kind of find in the introduction, you can find these, what they're talking about when they refer to these things. These are all old. These are all from the early 20th century or 19th century. So it's like, commentaries from like 1885 or something. These aren't the best places to go look right now, right? But nevertheless, the stuff in the Bible, Isaiah 14, 29 and 36, you can go look that up and say, okay, cool, interesting. So personif means personification of lightning. That's pretty cool, huh? And if you kind of go down here, Egyptian guardian griffins called sheriff. So in Egypt, they have these things like not seraphim, but sheraphim. And it says V, that means go see, for viz or visualize. V. See also keruv. Remember cherubim? So cherubim and seraphim often go together. So you can go look up keruv and see some other cool stuff about some of these angels or divine beings, right? So Egyptian guardian griffins called sheriff. On AS would be Assyrian, sharapu. So people in Mesopotamia called this stuff sharapu, an epithet or a name of the god Nergal, connected to this root. By the way, when you see this little thing that looks like a square root sign, that's telling you that's a Hebrew root, right? You know how Hebrew works with roots? So the root, sharaf, see sharav, and that's like, you can look up sharav and just see what they're pointing you to. So in the Old, here's the real definition here. In the Old Testament, majestic beings with 6 wings, which is what Isaiah says they have, right? And human hands and voices attendant upon. And then this just has a little yod and a line. This is an ancient Jewish way to do abbreviations, still used today. And this yod with a little abbreviation sign is telling you Yahweh. This is how they write the name of Yahweh in the BDB, but also in much of Jewish literature. So if you ever see just a yod with a little line after it, like the apostrophe after it like this, you're looking at the name of Yahweh. They don't say the name of Yahweh, right? They would just say Hashem, which means the name, or something like that. So there's other things you can say, but that's one of the things you hear Jewish folks say. But this is a way to write out Yahweh's name, but not write the whole thing. And then it says Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2 and 6, which is where you find this word occurs. So there's a lot of cool information there. And if you look up Saraf 1, go ahead and look up there. What do you see? Some interesting information. So here I can sum some of this up here. So Saraf 2, that little dagger that you saw next to Saraf 2, remember the second meaning of the root Saraf? That dagger indicated all the occurrences were listed. So every single time that occurs in the Bible, you saw it right there. The noun only occurs twice in the Bible, in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2 and 6. Wow, it's pretty interesting, right? Everyone knows about the seraphim, but it only occurs that one chapter in the whole Bible. Then those brackets indicated that the noun never appears in this precise form. It only ever occurs in the plural form, but they don't want to list the plural form as the one that you look up. They want to give the singular form because that's the most basic one. So they put it in those brackets to be like, it doesn't actually ever show up like this, but we know this is what it would be. And then NM, nomen masculinum. Remember, that's Latin. So that means masculine noun. So I always look at that. I always say in my mind when I see NM, noun masculine. NF would be noun feminine. And then Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2, that says, well, we know the noun is masculine because there's a masculine participle. The verb actually occurs in a masculine form, and it has an eem ending, so that makes sense. And then PL means plural, right? And then it says seraphim after it to say that's like what it means. It means seraphim. But what does seraphim mean, right? And then remember all those editorial notes, those things that had like references to commentaries and stuff. It's probably like Saraf 1. And then it refers to those commentaries like Cheney's commentary. All of those are before 1906. Don't go track those down. Don't worry about it. You'll find better stuff in more recent commentaries. They'll refer to dictionary articles. Again, don't chase those down. If you want to find the kind of basic meaning of something, the Anchor Bible Dictionary is a great place to turn. The New Interpreter's Bible Dictionary is a great place to turn. There's other resources that'll really help you much better than something that published in 1901 or something. And it'll give you some possible cognates. Remember that Akkadian word or Assyrian word, sharapu, and we had that Egyptian word that was pretty cool, that was pretty similar. Those are cognates. Those are words that sound like that word and that we think probably are kind of talking about the same thing in those other languages that are near, close by. So all those Mesopotamian languages are very similar languages, kind of like French and Spanish. Just like if you don't know what a word means in French, you might look it up in Spanish and find the cognate and be like, well, if it means this in Spanish, it probably means something like that in French, right? Because they both came from the same source. Well, that's true of all those Mesopotamian languages, like Babylonian, Assyrian. The word that's used to kind of talk about all those languages is Akkadian. And then Canaanite stuff from Ugarit, which is a Canaanite town that was dug up that had all this really cool information in it in the 1940s that's been translated now. And stuff from Egypt is also really applicable. So all those cognates you'll find there. And then some speculation. Every once in a while they'll be like, probably this, or maybe this, right? And they'll tell you to look other places. They'll be like, look up that cherub stuff, right? The karuf, that word karuf, look that up because, V, right? Remember see karuf, because that might be some cool stuff there for you. So if you go and look up that verb saraf, the kind of bigger entry, right? Saraf 2, which means like the seraphim in Isaiah, that's a subset of this kind of larger idea here in Saraf 1. So if you remember, they said look it up. They said go check that out. Well, that verb saraf means burn. Now you see here it says saraf 117, and 117 times it occurs. VB, which means verb, and then it'll have the little definition of it, burn. And then it'll say 70 times plus ba'esh, with fire, or in fire. Esh means fire, ba means in, right? And so then you can also see there's some cognates here, right? So As, or Assyrian, or Akkadian, this is Mesopotamian, sharapu. Aramaic, saraf, rare. So Aramaic is a very similar language. They use the same alphabet. In fact, Hebrew's alphabet is stolen from the Arameans who spoke Aramaic. But so here's saraf, rare. And then here's the Syriac. Remember I mentioned Syriac? This is like a very closely related language to Aramaic. Fascinating, because Jews and Christians have written in Syriac ever since just a couple centuries after the time of Jesus till today. So if you ever heard of Iraqi Christians and things, many of them are Syriac-speaking Christians. But in any event, this is Syriac. You can't read it very easily unless you know Syriac. But here it basically says saraf, is absorb or consume. So it's being burned up, right? So it has something to do with burning. Fascinating, right? And then we see here call. Now you've learned a little bit about the call verbs so far, and then PF means perfect, call perfect form. Third masculine singular form, saraf. That's the dictionary form, so they're going to abbreviate it here with that little slash. Joshua 11:9. Okay, so they're just telling you some places you can find it. But then they're going to give you the kind of weirder forms. They're going to show it to you. So a third feminine singular suffixed form, they're going to show it to you here. That's what it looks like in Isaiah chapter 47, verse 14. Like it's an example of it. And then here's the imperfect form. They're going to show you what an imperfect form looks like and so on. Infinitive absolute, which you'll learn about soon. Construct form, participle, an active participle, which you haven't learned yet, but you will. So they're showing you all these different forms of the verb, which is super cool, because if you are like, I'm not really sure what form of the verb I'm looking at here, you can look up the root, and oftentimes the BDB will show you what you're looking at. They'll tell you what it is. They'll be like, that's an infinitive absolute form, sarof. Right? They got it right there for you. And they'll give you an example of what text. And sometimes you see the text, you're like looking it up and you're like, that's my text. Boom, I know exactly what that thing is now, right? So they're just giving you some examples of what it looks like. And then you see like a 1, 2 in highlighted in blue here. That 1 in making bricks, that's Genesis 11. So let's burn bricks to burn them is what they say in the Tower of Babel story. And that's the word, saraf, that's used there. And then 2, sometimes it can mean some of the other things, usually to destroy, like burn something with fire to destroy it. Burn it up with fire. Or burn bones to lime in Amos chapter 2, verse 1. So this is, just a different examples of what this word might mean. So then we say we've got something that's like a fiery serpent thing. So the verb saraf means to burn. And seraphim, there's something about serpents. The same word is used kind of to mean serpents in other places in Isaiah. So that means that the seraphim, they're fiery, flying serpent creatures. These are not chubby little babies. The cherubim and the seraphim. The cherubim actually turn out to be like a sphinx, lion body, wings, and a human head. Seraphim are flying snake monsters. Pretty awesome and cool, actually, I think. So just to give you a sense, the best guess we have about these seraphim is that they actually are flying, fiery, winged serpent creatures that are divine beings. So here are some images that we have of seraphim. This one's from Egypt. You can see this Egyptian head here, head of a human, a serpent body and wings. We can see another image over here from Egypt, this winged serpent figure that is breathing some fire over here. And then we see these winged, these are actually from Judah. These are actually seal impressions, like kind of how someone would like have a ring with like an impression on it, and they could seal documents with this, put a little bit of wax on the document and push it in so you could see that the person had sealed this document for you to kind of prove that it was them who had sent it. So these ring seal impressions here that we have, you can see there's this human-headed kind of snake thing with wings over here, and here's another snake thing with wings, snake thing with lots of wings, snake thing with lots of wings. And they have 6 wings in Isaiah, but it seems like they have multiple, between 2 and 6 wings in these different images that we have here. But all to say, these winged flying snake things are symbols of divine presence in the ancient world, in the same way that those lion-bodied, human-headed, winged forms were also symbols of divine presence that we today call cherubim. Just to say that scene of the hem of God's robe filling the temple, this is a temple that if you're in the Old Testament class, I showed you an image of this Hittite temple when we talked about priestly literature, just to show you that the Hittite, the people who lived in what's now modern-day Turkey, but back in the Bronze Age, long time ago, they had the same types of temples that we see in Israel. That is, everyone had these kind of temples with like a forecourt and then like a holy of holies, like a bedroom for the king, for the god who was imaged as a king, with like a throne, But also you can see in this particular temple that there are these giant feet to show this is someone actually standing in those giant footprints to show you. So the idea is that the gods were imagined to be huge and filling up these temples. But in Isaiah, so this is an image of Isaiah actually being present in the temple to receive a message from God. So let's move from Seraph and Seraphim to Kadosh. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Holy, holy, holy. If you look this up in the dictionary, you might look up Kadosh, and you'd first turn to the Kof section, and then you'd turn to like Kof, you go Kof Aleph, Kof Beit, Kof Gimel, Kof Dalet, and then you might go, okay, Kof Dalet Aleph, Kof Dalet Beit, Kof Dalet Gimel, and then you might go down to Vav. Now, why would it not be listed under Kof, Dalet, Vav, Shin? And that's because the root is not Kof, Dalet, Vav, Shin. That's a matres, a mater. That is a helper vowel here, that Holam Vav. So, what's the root? Kof, Dalet, Shin. If you look that up, you'll find it on page 871. So go ahead and try to find that now if you haven't tried to find it already. And then here's our dictionary definition. So, Kadosh, here's our root, and then it says root here of following, F-O-L-L, the root of the following, possibly an original idea of separation or withdrawal. I think this is beyond doubt, but the original idea behind holiness is that something is withdrawn or separated at a remove. It is separate, set aside for God's special use, or that it is in some way a presence of divine presence. And then you got all these like little Baudstudian, like these are all referring to different publications that kind of prove this point or try to interact with this point. Don't worry about those. Those are again from like 1850 or something, so just forget about those. But you can see here we have other languages, Phoenician. they use kadosh and mikdash, meaning a sanctuary, a place of holiness. Assyrian or Akkadian kadashu, meaning the cleanse. Here's another early modern publication over here. And then kadishtu or hierodule, someone who's consecrated to Ishtar. A hierodule, that's a Greek term, but kadishtu is the Mesopotamian term. Someone who's been set aside for Ishtar's use. That is a priest or a priestess. And then here's an Arabic term. If you can read Arabic, then you can read some cool stuff in the BDB, because Arabic is a Semitic language, very similar to Hebrew, and it can be used as a cognate or a comparative study of Hebrew. So Ethiopic, Syriac. Here's our Syriac term to consecrate. Here's our Palmyrene, the people who lived in basically the part of Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade, when he goes into the like that amazing city that's carved into the rock in modern day Jordan. The Palmyrene folks lived during that area. The Arameans, here's an Aramaic version of this. So in any event, here's all this kind of comparative stuff at the very beginning of that. So we got some speculations about original meanings. We call this etymology, the study of the history of a word, where it comes from. We got some studies of secondary literature, like commentaries, those commentaries from the 1800s, right? Dictionary articles, and then cognates, those similar languages, right? So like what the same word means in Ethiopic or something. Okay, so then we would kind of look up the entries. We find Kodesh, like the subheadings, right? So Kadosh means something about separation or something. The root. Kof, Dalet, Shin. But what about Kadosh? So we go through the sub-entries to try to find our particular word. So Kodesh, NM, or masculine noun, or Kadosh, there we go, an adjective. That's what we're trying to look up there on 872. We can also just keep going and say Kadash, that's our verb, to separate something, right? Kadesh, that's another noun. And then Kedesh, a place, a proper location. So Kedesh, which, by the way, if you are in the Old Testament class, we just talked about the oasis of Kedesh in the book of Numbers, which plays a huge role there. This oasis that's set apart. And then Kadesh, another proper location. And then Mikdash, a masculine noun. This is a place, but it's not a particular place. Anyone can make one of these. It's a sanctuary, a place of being set aside or made holy. Let's say, okay, so kadosh here. This is an adjective, sacred and holy, and you can see this little sword up here tells you every single occurrence of this is in this dictionary. So you can, if you see that word, you can find it here, and it'll kind of help you figure out what it means in your particular context. So this adjective means sacred or holy. The absolute form, Kodesh, you can find in Exodus 19 and so on. So Kadosh, not spelled spelled defectively or without the Holam Vav. You can find that in Exodus 29. The construct form, see how it reduced the vowel there. You can find it in Isaiah chapter 1 verse 4. So all this stuff. And then it says 1. So here's our first real definition here, a particular definition of God as separate, apart, and so sacred or holy. A sub-definition of that, sometimes God is being described as exalted on theophanic throne. Theophanic means like the divine. God's being exalted on a divine throne in the temple. Isaiah 6:333, holy, 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 right? So every single time it occurs, they'll list it there. So 3 times in Isaiah 6. And then also this little psi sign, it's a Greek letter. See that psi letter, that's a psalm. So this is Psalm 22:4. Heavenly throne, Isaiah 57, and so on. And then you can go down to the next definition, and let's say yours wasn't there. You say be separate from human infirmity, impurity, and sin. So this would be like kind of saying that God's set apartness, it has something to do with God's perfection or something. So you can find that meaning in Joshua and 1 Samuel 6:20, Leviticus 11, and so on. Yeah, Ezekiel over here. And then you can keep going, 2, this is a different type of meaning, a different meaning of place, sacred, holy. So a holy space, Ezekiel 42:13, a camp of the Israelites being holy, Deuteronomy 23:15. So you can kind of keep going, and if let's say your definition, the time it occurred that you were trying to look it up was Isaiah chapter 4 verse 3. You'd look around, boom, 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 scan it. Oh, Isaiah chapter 4 verse 3 right here, and then you'd say, remnant in Jerusalem. So the remnant, the holy sacred remnant in Jerusalem after a disaster is what we're talking about there. So this is basically how you work with the BDB. Like I said, this dagger indicates all occurrences cited. You got all those various forms that occur there. You got these different usages. So of God, of a place, of persons, of angels, holy water is even there, of time, a holy space, and so on. So basically they divided up into two halves. Whenever it talks about God, they said that's not the number one, and everything else is number two. And it'll give you all those definitions, all those particular definitions. So a word can mean something different if it's used in a different context. So that's a bit why we don't just work with like the root definition of the word. We want to find our specific definition because, if like I said, that word meat, right? You can use that in different ways. Or it is right and meet so to do is part of the Episcopal prayer book, which is what I use. It's the old form of it, but so it is right and meet so to do. That doesn't mean meet someone, say hi to them. It's a different meaning of that word. It's appropriate is what that word means. So that I don't want to just use one form of the definition that I find in the dictionary and apply it to all uses of the word. So the good thing about the BDB is it'll show you all of the different meanings of the word, and it'll show you where it thinks yours, which one it thinks yours is. It's not always right. That is, you can argue with the BDB, but they know a lot. These are some really, these were some brilliant people who put together this, even though they were limited in terms of their time and space and so on. But Brown, Driver, and Briggs, they actually did a pretty fantastic job. One other word here to look at, and that's Torah. Now, you might have heard me say that Torah is not the root. The root is actually from Yara. So if you look up Torah, they know that you're going to get this wrong. They know that people are just going to go look up Torah in the dictionary. They're not going to know what the root is. So if you see page 1064, column 2, you look up Torah, it'll say V, that means go see, visualize. Go see Yara. It'll tell you what the root is. Does that make sense? So you look it up. Sometimes you look up the wrong root. Oftentimes they'll tell you what the right word is, what the right root is. So they'll spell out the word that you're looking for. V, go see Yara. Then you have to turn and find Yara. You have to go to actually Yod there. So what's the root? Yara. Tav is a prefix for some nouns. So Yara means to point at something. Torah means something that's been pointed out to you. Instruction. So the root Yara, you can find all these different sub-meanings, right? These different definitions, the subheadings. So Yara, the verb. Yora, a proper noun. Yorech, a noun. Mora, one. Mora, two, right? So you can kind of find different sub-definitions of this then. So this is what we call a derivative, a word that's derived from the root. So the verb means to point out with someone's finger, which is then used metaphorically to mean direct someone or teach someone, right? So Yora is the early rain. It's the pointing rain, the rain that points to the new season, probably. Well, Mora is a teacher, somebody who points something out to you. So the root here, Yara, to throw, to shoot. You can see shoot arrows even and stuff like that. That's kind of the verb. You can see all these different meanings here. All the occurrences are cited. And F, this noun for Torah, is known from Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 5. The demonstrative is feminine. So you can go ahead and find these different words and find what they mean. So Torah doesn't mean law. That's what's important about this right here. Torah doesn't mean law. It means instruction, teaching. So the Torah isn't a law that's meant to condemn you to hell, that Jesus saves you from. No, the Torah is meant to teach you things, which is why Jesus says that he didn't come to take away the Torah. He came instead to fulfill it. And what does that mean? Well, we can get to that later. But I hope this has been somewhat instructive for getting you to understand the BDB and all of its complexities. Feel free to use the online version, the PDF. It's for free. It's been posted on the Moodle site near the top, like where the links to office hours stuff are. But also know that if you order this online, it's fairly inexpensive. It's about $20 or so. You can get them even cheaper, probably used on Amazon. And having the hard copy actually does help. And you are allowed to use the BDB on your quizzes, not your vocab quizzes, but on your grammar quizzes. And please use it for translation assignments and everything else. And it's not just that you'll find the right answer or something. You also will find some really cool stuff in there. Hope that helps, and I'll see you soon.